Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Tuesday, and we are getting closer and closer to my favorite holiday really of the wintertime holidays. Really, it's Thanksgiving for me. It's the one that, believe it or not, I know some people find it pretty stressful. For me, it's always been the least stressful of the holidays overall. And that doesn't say that there isn't any stress, but nonetheless, I hope you have a stress-free and great Thanksgiving as we roll along over the next couple of days. It looks like, weather-wise, for the most part, it looks fairly benign. Although we do have a few minor things going on that we're going to look at. There's a low that's off the southeast coast that looks like it's going to clip parts of coastal New Jersey and Long Island, maybe back to about New York City and southern New England tomorrow morning with some rain. And it might even be actually a little bit heavier as you go to eastern Long Island and southeastern New England. And after that, I mean, it doesn't really look like that we're going to see any big storms around for a while, at least the way the weather models are shaping up. Sometimes when models don't show anything for 16 days, there's a very good likelihood that it's wrong. But until proven otherwise, we're going to have to wait and see how this pattern, finally lines up as we go into the end of the month and the beginning of December. See, a few of you have joined: Jason Schaefer, Doug Crum, Karen Steed, Dio Nankubar, Aerolore Productions, Adam Fitz, and a good evening to all of you. And Lidl Griffin just jumped on board. So why don't we take a look at what's happening this evening? And there's a weather system that's sitting off, that came out of the Gulf of Mexico. And the models for the last couple of days have been trying to push this thing offshore, except for the NAM model, by the way. Those of you who occasionally love to criticize the NAM model, it has done pretty well of late with these types of systems. It's been continually trying to show rain hugging the coastline, and you can see it here. It's actually not a bad looking satellite signature here, a little bit of a twist in the cloud cover as this area moves more north-northeast than east-northeast. That's one of the errors I think the models had with this, that this whole thing is just trending to the west, and you can see the troughing out to the west. It's just kind of pulling it up. And I guess where the models messed up on this, in that it probably brought the system that's coming now down across the Great Lakes to sort of squash this out to the east. It's not quite doing that. This is probably a little bit slower, and that's leaving this a little bit more room to head up the coast. And there's some showers and even a few heavier downpours and thunderstorms showing up on radars off the Georgia, South Carolina coast. So I'm thinking tomorrow morning, coastal New Jersey, back to about New York City, maybe into southern areas of Westchester County, on up through southern New England and Long Island. We'll probably get rain for about 6 or 7 hours or so, and it could be on the order on the western edge. Of course, it'll be not that much, but there could be some 1/2 to 3/4 inch amounts as you go to the east in southern New England and over Long Island. But it should be done by midday or early afternoon at the latest. And of course, if you're north and west of there, you're not going to have much of anything. So once that's done, it is going to clear up fairly quickly. You can see there's dry air. This is the dry air that's back up through the Plain States and the upper Midwest behind the upper trough and cold front swinging through the lake. So that is going to move into the northeast, setting us up for a pretty chilly Thanksgiving Day, but there'll be a good deal of sunshine, but the temperatures are going to be not much higher than the low or middle 40s. The Pacific Northwest is the other spot that we've got some action going on, and I'm going to start with the satellite of the storm that's off the Pacific Northwest. It's actually pretty impressive here on the satellite loop, and we showed you yesterday that stream of subtropical moisture that was shooting up from south of 20 degrees north, going all the way up northeastward into Oregon and Washington, and that channel of moisture continues. You can see the rotation with the storm sitting out offshore. So it hasn't really moved very much. It's just kind of sitting there. So this rain just keeps coming and coming. And of course, in the higher elevations in the west, we're looking at some snow. I'll see if I can get that radar up for you. And there we go. Pop it up to the front. And you can see a lot of rain coming into Washington State. There's some more rain now edging up into northern California, right in the northwest corner there. And of course, that all translates into snow once you get into eastern Washington and up and through northern Idaho. They've been getting quite a bit of snow up in this area over the last number of weeks. The snow cover there just grows and grows and grows. So that part, the Intermountain West, particularly the Intermountain Northwest, has really done quite well with the early snows this season. So let's see what our favorite model is doing, and we'll give you the full view so you can see the storm out in the west. At the moment, you've got that rain off the southeast coast, and you've got the cold front that's approaching the eastern lakes. Some snow there being indicated by the GFS this evening in parts of southeastern Michigan and northern Indiana. That will gradually shift up into parts of upstate New York. And we'll get this moving here for you. So you can see that southern low, and actually the GFS really wraps that low up into a tight little ball there off the Virginia coast, and actually forms another low northeast of the Bahamas that moves out to the northeast. And there's your snow, a little bit, just a very minor snows in upstate New York and in northwestern Vermont with this as the low pulls out, and then it gradually translates into Maine. Of course, you've got more rain into the Pacific Northwest going into Friday. That goes up into the northern Rockies. Next weather front. Now this is a change. The last couple of runs of the models have really changed the structure of the cold front that comes through later on Saturday. The system, the upper air system, instead of dropping southward, winds up pulling out to the northeast. So we get another one of these quick shots of cold air for Saturday night and Sunday, but it really doesn't look all that impressive. And then it pulls out very quickly. We had these models keeping things pretty cold right into Tuesday, and the core of the cold air is already gone by Sunday afternoon, and we're starting to see milder air beginning to come back on Monday. So there's been a change in the overall upper air profile, not only just the GFS doing it, but the European as well. And then as we go into next week, again, nothing major here. It might actually get fairly mild in the east for Tuesday and Wednesday, and then another weak front comes through on Thursday. So we might have some mild temperatures here Monday, maybe not so much on Monday, but Tuesday and Wednesday before a front goes by. And of course the Northwest continues to get pounded. Now, some reason the model is looking at some kind of system that heads down off the south to the southeast, and then it runs up that low up the coast as we go into the first weekend of December. But of course there really isn't very much cold air around, and even as we move into the first 4 or 5 days of December, you don't really see too much. The GFS on this run wants to make it colder as we get later in the period. You can see this high coming down and a cold front coming through in the eastern U.S., but it pretty much, to me, just kind of looks like more of the same nonsense that we have been experiencing. And one of the big things continues to be how the model handles the block, and it really is not handling it well at all. There's your blocking high sitting up near Greenland over the Davis Straits, and then it disappears, and then another high builds back in that area as we move through early next week. But the flow across the United States is just not really conducive for major activity, except again in the west. You can see this upper low comes in the western U.S. Trough lifts out in the east, and there's your milder air in the east with a west-southwest flow aloft. There's actually a ridge that pops up during the middle of next week for a short time before a trough swings through. Now, the models, the late afternoon model is making more of this kind of broad vortex that forms in central Canada. The prior run didn't really do this. And I think what's happening again is the fact that, you've got all these, these higher than normal pressures up in the polar regions, and every model run handles it differently. So you wind up with, changing solutions in the long range. So this is going to change again. This is a colder solution longer term than the day run of the GFS was, but it still looks, very, let's call it messy overall. So I think we're still going to be in this process for the next couple of weeks of watching this pattern just morph into whatever it's going to wind up being when we ultimately lock into something, and usually we do lock into some kind of pattern toward the latter part of December. But it looks to me like the atmosphere still has work to do with regards to that. As far as Eastern Canada is concerned, for my buddies up in the Canadian Maritimes, we'll give you a look here because you've got this first low that's coming out that's going to impact you. I want to shrink this up so you can see the date a bit better. Let me just make this a little smaller. And there you have our Thanksgiving Day anyway, and there's that low that goes by Wednesday into Thursday, and it gets wrapped up pretty strongly. It has a fairly strong system moving into Nova Scotia with heavy rains and some rather gusty winds, and you can see the snow on the west side of that. The low actually tracks west of Newfoundland and on up into southeastern Labrador before it moves out. And going into the weekend, we don't see too much happening. There's something well west and north over closer to Hudson Bay than anything else, but really not too much weather going on. Another coastal low brings more rain to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, with some snows back on the west side as the low moves northward. And now we are approaching Tuesday of next week, and we have another, looks like a warm front, cold front scenario setting up here with a low tracking up to St. Lawrence Valley. So I'm going to be curious to see what this first low, let me go back. You've got this first low, it's pretty tightly wound up on the GFS. So I don't know whether that might, be responding to the still warm ocean. It's highly unusual to see something wrapped up with so many isobars that way this time of year, to see something that tight. I'm not sure if there's something else going on. Hurricane Center's not talking about it and mentioning anything about the action going on off the southeast, but I'm going to keep an eye on this as we move ahead. And for our friends across the pond, why don't we take a look real fast at what's happening from the standpoint over in Europe. And we've got more rain into the British Isles here for Wednesday and Thursday, and even some snow indicated for parts of northern Scotland. The snow, probably some colder air there that's being brought down from the north with the block the way it's set up. And then a storm system, let me just back it up here. Looks like a storm develops off the coast of France and runs through the English Channel and then intensifies as it heads up into Norway and Sweden. Some snow there up in the Alps. More rain into the British Isles early next week with a complex low that sweeps in from the Atlantic. And then it looks like maybe some colder air coming down from the north as we move toward the very end of the month. And another tight little low is being indicated here into the Mediterranean. We're going to have to keep an eye on that to see what happens because of what happened last week. And hang on. I'm sorry, I just want to shut something off here. Okay. And there I've just looped it for you so you can take a look at how it runs over time as we move now Monday 27th, the 28th, and so on. So a little bit of stormy action there overseas. And in terms of snowfall, because I know everybody likes to see where it's going to snow, so why don't we take a look at that. and actually showing even some snow on the GFS, showing up in parts of southern England, and also up into the western side of Ireland, and a good chunk of Europe has some hefty snows being shown up in parts of southern Germany and over through Poland, and then on south and east of there. So very interesting from that respect. We'll show you the total snowfall that the model is forecasting for Canada. Again, try to just use this as a very broad guide. You know, not too much on along coastal areas, but considerable amounts throughout most of southeastern Labrador. And back home in the U.S., in terms of snowfall, not really all that much. Again, most of the action in the Northwest. We'll give you a close-up view here. Over the next 10 days or so, we're looking at a considerable amount certainly in some of the higher elevations up through Idaho. Again, they've been getting quite a bit of it here and into northern Washington and on up into southwest Canada. But as we look to the east, with the pattern the way it is, it's just hard to produce any kind of big snows, even across the northern plains and on up into the northern Great Lakes. There really isn't too much. And over in the northeast, very, very light lake effect action here with this change in the structure of the system in the eastern part of the United States for this coming weekend. It looked like there might be a fairly sizable lake effect event with that, but now, with everything so much weaker and so much more progressive, where it just kind of moves along, it doesn't look to me like you're going to get too much action that way. So let me just real quick talk to you guys on the chat board, and let's see. So if I did miss saying hello to you earlier, I will say hello to you again, to all of you again, and want to wish you the best of all the best for Thanksgiving on Thursday. Yeah, Jason, somebody's going to get some heavy rain out of that. It might be central and eastern Long Island more than anybody else. Hard to say where that back edge cutoff is going to be, but wherever it is, it's going to wind up being pretty sharp. Yes, always smiling. You know what? Just looking at what the GFS did, you might see some. You'll see some snow in Ireland. Weather models have been indicating. It looked like there was maybe enough cold air for that. I got to get used to figuring. I got to learn how to figure all that out. Anthony Orr wants to know what's on the dinner menu for me. Well, actually, tomorrow I'm having Thanksgiving at one of my daughters, and I'm cooking. So I'm making a 17-pound turkey that's going to be wrapped in butcher block bacon with a cornbread sausage stuffing, and I'm making butternut squash soup. And what else am I making? I also am going to be making some chocolate chip and oatmeal cookies. So one of my other daughters is bringing some macaroni and cheese dish of some kind, and I think I'm also my daughter who's hosting is going to be making some mashed potatoes. My third daughter is just basically coming to eat because she's in medical school and she doesn't have time to help in the preparation. So she will supply a willing appetite, as all of us are. It's going to be plenty of food for sure, and I hope it turns out good. Some are hinting at a big plunge in the NAO and a big blocking event mid-December after the warm-up. Joseph Harcourt, early December. Why would this be? Well, I'll tell you something, Joseph. As we looked even through the runs of the last several days, it looks to me that even though this first blocking high weakens fairly quickly, one comes right back and replaces it fairly fast. And I think that's an important development to pay attention to, because that could be a sign that this negative North Atlantic oscillation, for those of you, it's a measure of pressure changes. If the North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO, is negative, it means that pressures are actually higher up in toward the polar region, and that displaces the jet further south, and it can create a blocking pattern. It also tends to favor colder than average temperatures in the eastern United States most of the time. There are ways where it doesn't work, but most of the time that is the case. And the fact that we're seeing this, the blocking kind of, instead of just disappearing and changing into a whole nother pattern, it's sort of pulsing, where it pulses and gets strong, then it weakens, but then another one pulses back up. So I think I think that's a very important character that we need to pay attention to over the next couple of weeks while the atmosphere continues to sort of align itself in other places. We got to straighten out the Pacific jet. We've got to straighten out what's going on in the Pacific Northwest and on up in the northwest, in southwestern Canada, because the way things are standing there now, with troughing there to some degree, it is sort of preventing storminess in the eastern part of the United States. So we got to watch to see how this all morphs into, what this all morphs into over time. But certainly we're going to be paying attention to that. Yes, Jason Schaefer, it's not just bacon, but it's butcher block bacon from Peter Luger's that I wrap my turkey in. Let's see, always smiling. Rashers over turkey, Irish saying for bacon. Nice. One of these days, always smiling, I'm going to get to Ireland. I'm going to, I've always said that I've always felt a connection to that part of the world for some reason. So maybe one day I'll figure it out. I might do one of those, swab tests to find out where my descendants came from. Kendall Bailey, have a great Thanksgiving also, and the same to you, William Huber. And Ownage Cubed, hello there to you. Brian Ford, it always blew my mind how severe weather is not that common in the winter in the East. I would think the opposite considering the deep troughs. Yeah, but you don't, you need to have that warm, unstable air. You don't have the atmosphere. Remember, the colder air doesn't hold as much moisture. You don't wind up getting the kind of lift that you do when you get with summertime thunderstorms. You need that warm air. I mean, severe weather, if it happens in the wintertime, it's going to happen in southern areas and not up in northern areas. Just too cold for that. Let's see, just trying to make sure I got all your questions here. And yes, Doug Crum, model bus from early runs. You can see, the NAM has been pretty good with these sorts of systems. So I think that's another thing we need to pay, when we're watching which models perform the best. That's a good idea. That's something I'm going to continue to keep in the back of my mind, that the NAM with these systems in the last couple of weeks that have we've had a couple of them that have snuck in, has done much better than the other models have. So make a mental note of that as we go forward. I know I didn't show it today. When we don't have too much going on, when we start to have more things, something going on that we're really watching, I'm going to be switching off from model to model so we can look at all the differences and figure out how this is all going to play. Karen Steed, why do models vary so much? Well, there's always a natural increase in variability as you go out through time, because as you go out further and further in time, there's more room for things to change and to be vastly different. I think specifically in an instance like this, when you have a blocking pattern in the atmosphere, it is a very unnatural state for the atmosphere to be in. So it's fighting to get back to some sort of natural state, and I think models have a very tough time with it. That's why we keep seeing the magnitude of the block, the position of the block, changing with every run of the models, especially beyond the third or fourth day. I mean, it really, you don't have to go that far to see the block being handled differently. The changes start to develop very, very early in the period and then extend further and further out. Joseph Arabia, how are you doing, buddy? Do we ever look at Europe and compare what happens overseas and how it relates to our winters? As I see, they are getting pretty good snows over there in the past month. I have to really go back to be honest about this, Joe. It's hard. We don't always. It's only in the last couple of years that we're starting to really pay more and more attention to what goes on there, if only because of the fact that we didn't always have that information. Yeah, we would hear about big storms and such, but it's only now that we get to really, look at things a bit better and closer. Also, some of the European weather websites are not very good, and they're certainly not very user-friendly. I got to applaud the National Weather Service with this, because, the NOAA website, weather.gov, I mean, you name it, you can find it. Forecasts, models, everything, it's all there, and they have all that information out there. When you go to some of these European government forecast websites, they're just not very good, and they're not very clear. They put up very simplistic forecasts. Some of them don't even really word any kind of forecast. They just put icons up, which I don't think does a good service to the people that they are forecasting for. Everybody's sort of starved for information, so it might be nice if some of the government offices do a little bit better with access to local forecasts than they do. Not all of them. Some of them do okay, but some don't. And maybe that's something that they need to look at. As far as specific weather is concerned, Joe, it was always my impression that whenever Western Europe winds up having a really cold and snowy winter, that usually winds up meaning that it's not the case here in the eastern part of the United States, that it's the opposite. But I can't really say that with any kind of certainty. I really would have to look deep into this and maybe talk to some people that are a little bit more familiar. I'll ask around and see if anybody has an inkling about that. Despite many of the long-term forecasts, Ownage Cube claiming a brutal winter and tons of snow. I'm hoping for a mild, quick winter this year for New York. Do I see a bad winter coming? Well, Ownage Cube, as you may, I think you're new. It's the first time I've seen you on the chat board, and welcome, and thank you for the question. I did not make a wintertime forecast this year. I'm not going to make any kind of long-range forecast like that anymore, because they really are an exercise in futility. And for me, I've never been able to get my head around all the highly technical stuff that you have to look at. I've got enough trouble looking at the short range and figuring out the fact that the model bust for my area for tomorrow over the last few days, let alone looking ahead to 2 or 3 months. I've always liked watching how the pattern evolves at this time of year and through December as a good indicator of where we are going forward. And even then, it's not foolproof. I would also say that the reason behind forecasting a winter that's cold is because most people are not going to click on a website that says, that puts up a forecast that says our winter forecast is for mild and no snow. I don't think that gets as much attention as forecasting a cold and snowy winter. So maybe until further notice, they're always going to forecast cold and snowy winters going forward. And I bet you most of the time that won't be the case. So the bottom line is, your specific question to me, do I see a bad winter coming? I think it's fair to say, and I don't think it's much of a forecast to say, that this winter will normalize from the last two, so that we will see things behave in a more normal or average fashion. And that could still mean a lot of volatility in both directions. But I think overall the winter ahead will behave in a more average fashion, and that it should be colder than the last two. Although whether it winds up being a lot colder than the last two or a little bit colder than the last two, that I couldn't tell you at this point. Keith Smolin, is there a La Nina? There's a weak La Nina underway, and it is forecast to remain weak and then gradually weaken further as we move into next year. We'll see if that is the case. La Ninas do have some impact on winters. Sometimes they do create cold and snowy conditions in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, and sometimes they don't. There are instances of both happening. But where we are with this one at this point remains to be seen. We are very, very early, exceedingly early in this winter game. We're not even into December yet. We're still into the end of the last 10 days of the month of November. Nothing of consequence has even gotten started yet. And most years, that is the case. So, you snow lovers out there, and all you snow weenies, you gotta relax. I would point out that the winter of 2014-2015, it was a mild December, and it really didn't get going until the middle part of January, and then it was just brutal from mid-January through mid-March. So, and in fact, in that year, February of 15, many areas in the Northeast experienced either their coldest Februarys on record, or certainly in the top 5 or top 10. So just because what you're seeing now is benign, and what you may see in December could wind up being benign, doesn't mean that it stays that way for January and February. It's a very, very long 3 months. And Delvin, you are correct. Boston did get 110 inches of snow that winter. That was unrelenting. Once we got through mid-January and the half blizzard, what we call the half blizzard here, because if you were in eastern parts of New York City, you had a foot of snow. If you were in western parts of New York City, which is just a handful of miles away, you barely had flurries. And if you were on Long Island, you had some places you had 2 to 3 feet. We call the famous half blizzard here, because for half the area the forecast was a huge bust. That said, that storm nailed Boston in a big way, and areas in southeastern New England. And again, it was unrelenting. We had an unrelenting period there from mid-January to mid-March. So you can't really draw any conclusions. And you know what? The opposite is true. If if it's cold and snowy now into January, we've had that happen. I believe it was the winter of 2010-2011, which was very active until the middle or latter part of January, and then it was over. The February and March were very benign and very mild. So, and I think even 76, 77 was like that. It was brutal from November through January till the first week of February, and after that, it was done. So there's no rhyme or reason for things to happen. Winters that start at the end of November and last through the middle of March are very rare occurrences. Meteorological winter ZUK start December 1st. Yes, to keep things neat, we weather folks like to look at the 3 coldest months, which calendar months, which are which are December, January, and February. The 3 months where temperatures are cooling the fastest: September, October, November, fall. The astronomical winter doesn't begin until December 21st or 22nd, the day of the winter solstice, and that's a different way of measuring it. But we do not flip switches on either days. Okay, weather is not one of those things, although it could flip a switch, but most times it doesn't. It's always a trip of volatility back and forth, and depending on where you land on the upslope or the downslope determines what you get. So anyhow, folks, getting close to showtime for me here. I might have time to do a live stream tomorrow, because dinner may be late. So if I have some downtime from all the cooking, I might try to do something tomorrow afternoon early, but I'm not promising anything. Definitely we'll do something on Thanksgiving Day late in the afternoon or evening, when I think everybody's done with dinner. So you can, by the way, if you haven't yet, subscribe to my YouTube channel, but which is free, of course, and just hit the little subscribe button there, and you can make sure you get notifications when live streams are coming on. At the top of my YouTube channel page, where the banner is, you'll see that there's icons for Facebook, my website, Twitter, Google+. You can find me on all those outlets, and you can come on my Facebook page and like my Facebook page, or follow me on Twitter by all means. And check out the Joe Stradamus store, which I don't have a link up for, but a link will come up on the video later on, and you can get to that on my website as well. Then you want to get some knickknacks for Christmas, some weather stuff, help yourselves. Okay, so everybody have a great Thanksgiving. If I don't see you here tomorrow, hope everybody is well. If you're traveling tomorrow, please travel safely. Take your time. Don't get too worked up by all the traffic. Weather at least won't be getting in your way. And again, if I have a chance tomorrow, I'll try to do a live stream. Otherwise, we'll do it sometime later Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening.